Randy, Erik, thanks for joining me here on the floor.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, good to have you guys. The company behind the companies that make things, right?
Absolutely.
That's a pretty good categorization of Flex.
Exactly.
Yeah, for those that, Randy, don't really understand scale, scope, capacity of Flex, help us broadly with the company and then their MedTech, Health Tech initiative.
Sure. I think, well, if people aren't intimately involved in supply chain and manufacturing operations, they may not have heard of Flex, but Flex is part of a $30 billion organization. So one of the largest companies that a lot of people maybe not have heard about. The health solutions business itself, we're very privileged to work with a lot of the top 20s, but also a lot of the upstart startups that are out there. And we kind of segment our business in between, medical equipment, medical devices, as well as drug delivery platforms, and then just from what we call concept to care. So anything from, we have 6 design centers globally that can help with kind of the R&D on the front end, or really come in at any stage gate as needed. But then what's nice to kind of, have that pass through into manufacturing and being able to do that at scale on a globalized basis across one of our 30 factories.
30 factories?
Yep.
Yeah, that's a pretty big sort of posse to wrangle. And as supply chain lead, that falls on your shoulders?
Yes, sir, yeah. So, as a company, we literally manage over 1 million different components in over 100 different factories, I think in 60 plus countries. And we have approximately 17,000 different suppliers that we work with. So a big part of our job is taking that global supply chain and making sure we're utilizing that within the health solution space. So we can take the strengths from the different industries, and as our customers are looking more in different regions, we can utilize that strength in each one of those regions to help our healthcare customers.
Well, because part of the Mullings Group expertise is building companies and careers. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about supply chain as a career. The last couple of years, you and I were chatting before we kicked off here. I don't want to put any pressure on you. Supply chain salaries have gone up 20%, all right? Because supply chain has become such an important component in the outcome of the success of any company. And we've seen big MedTech companies have a less than sort of optimal supply chain. And we've seen companies like Flex have used incredible tools in order to manage their supply chain. So what has changed since you went to college, university, since 2019 and thereafter?
Yeah, well, when I went to college was a long time ago. It's completely changed, right? I would say that the supply chain discussions have just become much more interesting than they have been, maybe 10, 20 years ago, where it was really looking for the lowest common denominator, and risk and quality and a lot of those things were kind of expected to be managed, right? I think in the world that we live in today, we know geopolitical, environmental, supply chain risks, financial issues with suppliers, all of those things make your sourcing decisions more critical on the front end. And I think one of the themes that we hear in every customer conversation we have is, how do we set the supply chain up to de-risk it, right? And to ensure that we're not just sourcing at the lowest common denominator, but we're taking the risk for our specific product and building that into our supply chain so we can manage that.
So up till about where Toyota did it, Deming did it back in Japan, where quality used to be inspected into a device back in the day, and then out of the crisis came out, all of us engineers read that book, and then sort of quality was designed into the thought process. It feels like that's where supply chain is since the last couple of years. True?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I would build on that also. And the fact that what we're doing is we have a system you may have heard about called Flex Pulse, which is a real-time data feed of all of our factories around the world that tell us that we have visibility to our POs, where parts are coming from, our inventory, that entire picture. What we're doing now is we're actually bringing in big data feeds from external partners, from suppliers, and we're taking that information to specifically give feedback to our customers about risk that is built into their bill of materials. So we can take it from the high-level geopolitical type of concerns and regionalization, all the way down to specific parts in their bill of material, and show them how that risk profile is putting their supply chain at risk.
So
and where they might address it.
So you're using, when we talk about MedTech and AI, we're typically talking about MedTech AI on the front end.
Sure.
Reading an image, and then determining that what the human eye can't see. Is AI being incorporated now into the Flex world on the front end?
Yeah, well, I think it is in many areas. So even if you're talking about what's going on at the shop floor, so everything's becoming more automated as those machines become smart and interconnected. So you can use analytics and machine learning to almost identify a problem earlier on the line. So it's going to stop a quality issue in its track. It's going to help with further inspections to ensure that it's spot on. So that's one aspect of it. But then also just further downstream, you're seeing the benefits, what Erik was saying, is really taking a look at those bombs, de-risking those materials. And as you even look at a trend of globalization and regionalization, I'm not saying one is better than the other, but again, as regionalization becomes more parts of top 20 MedTech companies, it's okay, if you're going to go to Eastern European, what does that supply base look like? If you're going into Mexico, what does that supply base look like deep in tier 2, tier 3, let alone a lot of companies are trying to look at an India strategy as well. So it's not just lifting and shifting in lines, training the personnel, getting that up and running to get the right throughput that you need. It's what does the supply base look like 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 years from now that are going to feed the regionalization strategy that people really need to tune into.
Devices are becoming more and more complex as well, right? And again, I've been at MedTech for about 33 years now. And so the complex things they used to keep in-house, and they wouldn't send that secret sauce out. But I'm watching more and more, the complexity is increasing, and the capabilities of organizations like Flex and other CMs have really become better prepared to make complex parts and complex systems than the actual top 10 med device companies ever thought about doing, which wasn't the case back in the day.
Sure.
Right, so do you see that as a constant evolution?
Yeah, I think it's a hybrid approach, and it's dependent on the company that you're talking about. But the one thing that I can speak to just from my experience at Flex is, as you see the site of care shifting from hospital centers to surgery centers to clinics down to everyday wearables. Let's click on the wearable button there. So that's going to increase the amount of patients that you could serve as an OEM. But with that, you're talking about in the diabetes space, glucose monitoring that needs to be, replaced, every week or every other week, or insulin delivery every couple of days. So when you think about the volumes that you're talking about at scale, you're talking about hundreds of millions or billions of devices, and that's where you need a partner that can have state-of-the-art industrialization, because there's a high need for industrialization. There's a high need for automation. You can't do those volumes without automation to attack it, let alone then you double click on the regional strategy and the supply base to feed those. So it's the scale that really, that we're talking about.
Erik, when you think about supply chain, we used to your point, what's the labor rate? We used to go to China because it was a low labor rate, and then we just bid it ourselves up out of a business there, right? But labor rate, is it as important any longer because of the capability of automation and technology and these sort of worker-less plants that can turn out a higher precise product, but it's all automation?
Maybe step off that a little bit. I would actually say all of those things are still absolutely critical to the decision, right? Not just the labor rates, but energy costs are different in each country, right? Your tax implications are different in each country. Your efficiencies are different in each country, right? There's different norms and things that you have to take into account when you're building out that supply chain. In addition to that, you need to look at the supply base around the regions that you're looking to build. So it's not just about being able to automate in a region. You also have to have suppliers that are in that region that can also support those volumes, right? And also understand that they need to be able to scale with that business. So you really have to look at it holistically. You can't just look at a labor rate anymore. And that's where the discussion is just becoming so much more interesting, I think, than what has been maybe in the prior 20 years or so.
Yeah, and so maybe your brain can manage that, I can't, right? That's that 3D chess in Star Trek that I'm just not able to do. But, so you're using probably, again, I'm going to come back to AI and machine learning, because to process all that data real time and make those decisions, will you move a product around regions based on dynamics?
So we actually do have software that will help us, so we can build out different supply chain scenarios. and we could put, the manufacturing in different regions. We could look at where the key suppliers are. You talk about the secret sauce. Some of those things you're not going to change, right? So you build those in as items that are not going to be variable, and then you can do scenario planning with different options. And with that, we can look at your transportation costs. When do you have a break even? When you have to go from sea to air freight? We can look at your CO2 emissions and see how those different solutions actually impact your environmental supply portions of your supply chain. So it's really being able to look at that holistic approach and make those decisions. And that's the last thing I'll say is it's just the expertise of the people. With all the AI, with all the machine learning and everything else, you still have to have experts that are having those conversations and testing the theories and making sure that the solutions are right.
So we go back down to having feet on the street in some of those areas too. You still will send one of your directors out and say, go visit that plant in Singapore. Here's what the data send to me, but go see what's going on there. You still have that, right?
Absolutely.
That human factor doesn't disappear.
Absolutely.
Sure. But I think any good plant lives and dies with the general manager of the plant as well. So that's where tone is set at the top, flows all the way through the factory. So without question, we are heavily dependent on our general managers to really do a great job, and we're blessed that they do. But I do think again, automation does play a factor, but it depends on also the type of products that you're talking about as well. Some things there needs to be a manual line to get it done. Some you can scope in and actually have stem to stern automation. But even if you're talking about molding, for instance, we have molding in some high cost European countries such as Switzerland. So we have 2 factories there, and again, we wouldn't be able to necessarily operate there if we didn't have the level of automation at that molding facility to really run it efficiently.
So as you look at the landscape for MedTech over the next couple of years, what do you see an acceleration of in regards to technologies, and what part the companies behind the companies will be playing?
From a technology perspective, that's a great question, because even before we jumped on stage here, we were talking about the analytics. I think companies, both OEMs as well as CDMOs, they can't get strong enough from an analytics perspective. We're blessed to have False and some other risk management tools that we've homegrown and developed. But again, the deeper that we get into analytics, machine learning is going to help us prevent and predict, right? Prevent and predict things to make better decisions. I love Erik, and we always joke, I talk to Erik more than I do my wife over the past couple of years. But it's being able to have the analytics to make the right decisions, to prevent, predict, whether we're talking about regionalization, whether we're talking about multi-sourcing, but it's just having that information at our fingertips.
Yeah, I'll add to it. My organization, our whole job is to interface with our customers, understand their specific product and their specific goals, whether it's targeted markets they're going after, regionalization or security of supply or whatever, right? And so our job is to understand where they're going with their products, look at their products, and then give them specific feedback on how to build that supply chain out. And that's our entire organization's goal, right? So in some cases you see trends, if you look in the device space, the miniaturization, Bluetooth connectivity, all those types of items. When you get into the equipment space, really you're dealing with large castings, right? So you're looking at freight considerations, tooling capability, and having that supply chain resiliency built in. And so each product category, each customer has different considerations and different concerns that you have to take into account when you're building them out.
So we're here at AdvaMed, and you've got your AdvaMed members that are the big mid-caps strategics, and then you have AdvaMed Excel, which are below 100 million, I think, in sales, and startups and things like that. So if I'm a startup, which is 70% of the headcount in MedTech,
Sure.
Do I go to a flex, or do I have to wait till I graduate to go to a flex to get on the bill of materials and get into my submission? Or is there a certain part of flex that has an on-ramp for that startup?
Yeah, I don't know, you want to take it?
We deal with everything from a startup to your major corporations. I've been involved in the whole breadth of situations, so the short answer is yes. we absolutely do engage in all those situations.
Yeah, I think it depends on what stage of the startup that it is as well, but that's where, again, we're very well diversified. So again, from a design perspective, that's where we really start working with a lot of the startups, just design from inception, right? But then if somebody if they're at an ability to lift and shift from a scalability, if they want to really get scale, that's core to what we do is line transfers as well. So there's that sweet spot that you can get where we could add extra value, we could help on the front end, but again, when you're ready to scale, that's when we can truly add value, from a supply chain perspective, looking at not only the BOM, but what we've seen over the past couple of years, even just to take a step back, is how closely supply chain is now working with design, not on the future roadmap, but the companies that have truly evolved or transformed over the past couple of years, they put a couple $1 million into looking at old legacy boards and components, right? Because if they got that right, they're de-risking the now, let alone the future, and they're not dealing with critical shortages still that may or may not exist. The legacy components, people are still living kind of hand to mouth. Those costs are also not going to come down, so as margins get squeezed, the people that invested with design to redesign those boards on a refresh are in a much, much better position, let alone working on the future roadmaps as well. So that's where we can provide value to those startups.
Can you provide value to those startups so big player comes in, strategic comes in, says, I want to acquire your company. We all know supply chain's important, quality management systems is important. How can I incorporate this into my organization with as little issue as possible and know that you sort of bulletproofed my acquisition and reduce the risk on that? Do you find that is an area that is not paid enough attention to in the startups?
I think it's startup dependent, right? Some have kind of been there, done that. They know what it takes if they're going to take it from an IPO perspective and the diligence and governance of what they need to build. But if they're trying to just sell it to a strategic, they know kind of those sweet spots that they have to have that competency, ingrained into the company. Mm-hmm. So I would say, yes, we can help from that perspective. But again, a lot of times we're the company behind the company. We have our own QMS system, or excuse me, not our homegrown. We partnered with Compliance Quest, probably arguably one of the greatest EQMS or QMS systems out there. So that adds some credibility, but we didn't do it to help that transition. We did it to have one QMS system globally across all of our factories to kind of level set that bar. So yeah.
That's a hell of a harmonization system there, I'm sure, to have
Absolutely.
all those facilities
and
across the board.
I would say also that if you look back to the COVID years, right, or the beginning of the COVID pandemic, we have multiple products that we worked with startup companies that we helped bring new products to market that did not exist before, right? And a lot of times the investors are looking for those companies to be able to scale and to grow with them. So when they're putting in seed capital and they're looking at acquiring those companies, they want to make sure that not only is the product good, but the supply chain can support the scope that they need to go towards, right? And so we can help them. And I think in all of our customer engagements, we're not looking to replace the customer, right? We're looking to enable the customer. And so the customers are going to control that secret sauce. They're going to make sure that they're close to that. Our job is to make sure that we can create value around the rest of the product and the supply chain and enable them to get to that scale. So I think it's something that Flex does very well.
Yeah.
And we saw a lot of examples of that, I think, during the COVID.
But even just cutting edge technology, just to build on that as well. So whether during COVID or let's say somebody's trying to do a line transfer, I was walking down the hall. I told the story earlier. Somebody ran into me and they're like, "Hey, you're from Flex." They wanted to have a conversation on digital twins. They said, "Is it real? Is it a marketing thing?" I'm like, "No, it is 100% real." That's what allowed us to scale during COVID on ventilators, to ramp at a factory that had never made a medical device and actually have an in-unit produced ventilator in production in 16 weeks. So with digital twins, you can run so many various what-if scenarios and modeling with different variables. What normally used to take, 3 months, now takes us 3 weeks in that. So just that technology, just using it to cutting edge from a manufacturing perspective has really allowed us to scale.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Always the suppliers behind the strategics and the players really support this industry much more than most people know as service providers. Thanks for sharing the story.
Yeah, no, thanks for having us.
You bet.
Cheers.
I'm Joe Mullings from the floor of MedTech Conference in Anaheim. Be well.